you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together we'll take your style above and beyond style. Hey everyone, welcome back to Above and Beyond Style. This is season 4, and I'm so grateful to be back with you after a little bit of a hiatus where I got to think and percolate a bit on what would this season be about and where we could take this next season of our conversation together. And of course, this podcast is always about this intersection between style, psychology, and spirituality. Those are really like 3 pillars of my life that have always sort of been present and very much influence and inform the ways that I do my work. And this particular season, I am, of course, excited to talk about those deeper level messages around our clothing choices, how we can show up authentically through our choices around clothing, and what those messages are about who we are that we're trying to share with the world. But it seemed a bit strange for me not also to incorporate some of the larger picture things that are happening in and around my life right now, because that feels the most authentic to be able to share and to weave in some of these aspects of my life that are definitely influencing how I get dressed and how I'm making some decisions. So this season's going to probably look a little different, not necessarily in the format of how this podcast is delivered. I'm going to have a conversation partner, which I will tell you more about her here in a moment. But ultimately, I want this season to really start to weave in some of these larger themes that are happening in my own life that also talk about style and wardrobe and all the things we love to do here on the podcast together. So if you've been listening to previous episodes, you know that I'm sort of in the middle of blowing up my life. And I use that term with great enthusiasm, with a little bit of uncertainty, or rather probably a lot of uncertainty, but recognizing that I'm in full transition. And it's an interesting place to be talking to you because I think sometimes like the great books like The Alchemist or Eat, Pray, Love, you hear about these stories sort of after they've made this decision to blow up their life, go on this great adventure. And now they're at that point where they're reflecting back on, how did that go? What were the lessons that I learned? What are the things that I'm taking away from this experience that I want to share forth? And in the middle of all this, I realized a really hard piece of this story would be, I'm not at the quote unquote end of my journey. So the reflective components would take some time, and it would be a bit strange to talk to you about style exclusively without telling you also alongside these stories of how my life is changing pretty significantly. So a quick recap. In April of 2023, I sold my home, and in essence, I became someone, a bit of a nomadic wanderer, if you will. I have been living on a temporary basis with a really close friend here in the Boston area. And I've been giving myself several months to explore, to adventure, and to just sort of see where my next lifestyle and life will take me in this next iteration of my life. If you're not familiar with this whole process of me and why I went into all of this, definitely encourage you to listen to some of the episodes in season 3 where I talk a little bit about it and recaps. But I wanted to really just highlight the fact that I made these choices to revamp my life, to look at kind of the path that I was going down, and felt dissatisfied feels like a really strong word, but I guess at the core of it, there was dissatisfaction because inevitably it moved me to make a change. And what I look at my life, in its previous iteration, I have a good life, like a really good life. I have a new business that I had ventured out as a stylist full time. I was living in a lovely, beautiful community. I have some friends in and around me. I was seeing my family, albeit at a distance, but I was still able to connect and be with them. So, by all means, this was a very fruitful, rich life. And yet there was still something very much missing for me when I thought about this concept of vibrancy was something that came up for me time and time again. And I talk throughout season 3 about that word. It was my word of the year. It was the word that I wanted to be able to come back to and put my finger on and say, vibrancy is something that I am living and I'm also aspiring to. And so the choices I'm making in the present moment are really about building this lifestyle of vibrancy. And I don't really know what that looks like yet. So I'm in the thick of it. And I think this interesting point of being able to talk to you from the middle of all this transition is that I'm learning lessons along the way. I'm making mistakes along the way. I'm living my life along the way, and also trying, because this podcast in my life is really, has a lot to do with style and wardrobe. Like all these things are along for the ride, and I think that's why it's been really fun to think about how would I weave in, how would I talk to you in this season about some of these big changes and wardrobe and style and some of these deeper psychological, spiritual things that are happening that I definitely believe about wardrobe, but are also happening on this larger scale. And so what came to me was to have a conversation partner, because I think in many ways being able to reflect with someone else about big change, and someone who might also be doing big change in their own lives, to be able to have that conversation. And interestingly enough, to find someone who had gone through the wardrobe experience with me. And that felt like a really unique type of request that I had in my own mind. And I'll tell you, when I came up with this person, it was sort of like the flash bulb, the light went off and all the things started to kind of come together in my mind about what if I invited this former client, still present day client, but someone who has worked with me in the past, to have this conversation knowing what was going on in her own life around change. So I think that's why this season I have dubbed it Riding the Waves of Change, because there is a significant portion of this exploration phase that both she and I are in, about learning about how to live within the transition of change. And I'm specifically using this theme around waves, water, ocean, surfing, because it's been something that, from an imagery perspective, has come up for me time and time again. And I think it's important for you to understand why I'm picking this metaphor, because I am not a surfer. I'm not someone who, while I enjoy the ocean and I really love being near the water, it was a metaphor that kind of kept popping up in my everyday. And if you're someone who sort of reads the signs or believes in signs, I had to stop and take notice that this metaphor, this theme about water and waves, kept coming up for me. And I want to tell you a little bit about in the ways that came up, and why then it felt like the right combination of, again, this specific conversation partner to join me. So you've heard before in previous episodes that my father is deceased. As of this summer, he has been gone for about 13 years. And my relationship with my dad has always been one that I very much value. I feel this way about my parents, that I feel like one of the lucky ones, that I've had a really good relationship. We're human. We have our faults and our problems. It's not absent of any of those things. but I've been able to have a very successful relationship with both my parents. And my dad in particular, when he died, it was sort of this big hit for me about the type of person that he was and the role he played in my life, and the absence of him in my life was pretty profound. And I think what I've learned in those 13 years since his quote unquote absence, because in truth, I've actually felt probably closer to him over the last 13 years than maybe I even did in the previous, that he was someone who very much has shown up for me, even in his afterlife. And I tell a lot of different stories about the ways that I feel connected to him. I very much feel like his presence is accompanying a lot of the life that I'm leading, and in fact, helping me make my way through these big transitional changes that I've opted to step into. He would be someone, no question, that would be supportive. He would have asked me some of the hard questions, but at the end of the day would really get to that heart space about, is this something that you feel called to do, want to do, passionate about? Like, what does your heart say? And I think he would be someone who would very much support me in the steps that I'm taking. It's important to know that my dad, in his human experience, was a very intellectual person. He was an academic through and through. He was a college professor the majority of his professional life. And he was someone who spent a lot of time reading and writing and thinking and sort of being in his head. And although I never really had this kind of conversation with him, I imagine that he had a very vivid imagination because of the stories and the ways that he would connect with the literature and being able to teach that and share a lot of that with his students. So my dad's imagination was great. He, as I said, was always sort of thinking and reading, and we used to laugh in our family that when my dad was reading a book, you would basically have to like set off a bomb in front of him to get his attention again, because he was so engrossed and so enamored with the literature and the stories and the thinking and the ideas that he would sort of go someplace else when he was reading. And I think he had such focus in that regard, and something that I really appreciated about him. But I think it's important to know that my dad spent a lot of time in his head. I think he was, as I said, a thinker and someone who was very much of a story within his own mind. Now, interestingly enough, after his passing, someone came to me and actually shared a story that my dad, in spite of this, this experience of being in his mind and his imagination the majority of his life, he had expressed that he always wanted to learn how to surf. And it was a funny story that got shared with me because, first of all, I never knew that my dad had this aspiration. He certainly never talked about wanting to learn to surf. But it was something that after his passing, I came to learn about him and was very curious about, and came to have a lot of questions in my own mind about, like, well, why didn't he surf? Or we were in landlocked Texas, so it makes sense to me that he wouldn't have had the opportunities to learn how to surf when we were growing up. And in his own childhood, he grew up in Ohio, so perhaps the lakes, but again, surfing on a lake is a much different experience than I think on the ocean, or if that's even possible. Again, I'm not a surfer. I don't know these technicalities. But it's interesting for me to imagine him as someone who would have really enjoyed the experience. Now, he always loved the water. When he visited me up in New England, he loved to be by the ocean. He loved the moody ocean. He loved Maine in particular, being by the rocks. And even on an overcast day, he would be in his total element, just sort of watching the waves come in and out. And it was something that I think really piqued my own curiosity about him. That one, he never learned to surf, and two, that he always wanted to learn how to surf. And I'll tell you, since learning this piece of information about my dad, this concept of like the wave, riding the wave, surfing has come up in the most strangest ways over the course of the last couple years in particular. For example, I was at a conference, and this conference was giving away these little items that are from other attendees at the conference. And included in it was an artist, someone who was an artist at the conference, and there was a picture of this big blue wave that had been given. It was, a replication of the original piece, but it was given to every attendee at the conference. So included in my little grab bag was this picture of this wave. And it struck me because I don't have the specific timeline in my head, but I think they were relatively close. Me learning about my dad and surfing and then receiving this little picture in this bag. And I can tell you from anywhere from people in conversation would start to talk about surfing or riding the waves or using that kind of metaphor about transition and, how you get through difficult times. You got to learn how to ride the wave, because instead of resisting it, that you learn to really lean into it and sort of go with the flow and learn how to be in the rhythm of the wave. So as you can see, this concept was sort of piquing my imagination, and I was thinking about riding the waves, and again, how perfect it was for me making this big transition in my life, that I needed to learn how to ride the waves, that the choices I had been making and am making and are making rather, is either there's no particularly perfect path to go down that is going to be problem-free or issue-free, that there would be challenges along the way that I would have to learn to move through and work through. But ultimately, if I were able to really learn how to ride that wave of change, how much smoother the whole journey would go. So let me swing back to this concept of my conversation partner. Now, again, remember, I'm trying to weave through this concept of someone who had experience with me in style, that knew me as a wardrobe consultant and could speak to that partnership. I also was looking for someone who understood big change, that would be within her own big change and be able to speak to transition, much like I was able to speak to transition. And then the third piece, which really clicked, was she's a surfer. She is someone who has spent most of her adult life surfing and could understand this metaphor probably better than I ever will. And so the conversation that started to unfold between us about these three pillars felt like the most perfect, natural way for us to have a conversation in this season with you. So that's why, friends, in this season 4, we're going to be talking about riding the waves of change and where that informs big change, transition, life choices, all the things. It's going to help inform our style choices and about how that shows up in our wardrobe and the ways that we want to present ourselves in the world. It's going to show up in our bodies. And actually, that's the fourth pillar that really clicked in with this particular conversation partner, because she is a chiropractor. She is someone who has intimate knowledge of the body, its workings, and bringing the body to homeostasis. So you can imagine when all these sort of pieces all felt like they were falling, pulling together like a puzzle piece one by one. It was just this most lovely combination of things that I thought, this is how we can have this conversation for season 4. So please let me introduce you to my conversation partner for this season, and you will get to meet her soon. Her name is Dr. Melissa Carrick. She actually goes by Missy as a short nickname, so you'll often hear me talking to her as Missy. But Dr. Melissa Carrick is a second-generation chiropractor who brings like the deepest understanding of the integration of the human person to her patients. Now, prior to her chiropractic career, Dr. Carrick actually obtained a master's degree in theological studies. So as you can imagine, I felt we also had this connection about spirituality and being able to talk that talk. Now, it was through studying theology that she realized the extent to which healthcare so often separates the body from spiritual and mental health. Now, through this path, Dr. Carrick found the neuro-emotional technique, also known as NET, which is now an integral part of her practice. And you'll hear her talking about NET throughout these episodes as something that we'll get into a bit more. Now, Dr. Carrick continues to avidly pursue new ways to help her patients experience greater health and well-being, completing extensive hours of continuing education every year, including studying laser, nutrition, and functional medicine, and a certification in acupuncture. Now, her mission in practice is to support people to be more of who they are and to do more of what they love. She practices in Baltimore, Maryland, and serves the greater Baltimore, Washington area at Carrick Health and Chiropractic. Now, outside the office, she is also a certified instructor for neuro-emotional technique, a speaker, and works with performance optimization and personalized healthcare. She is the director of the One Research Foundation, which is a nonprofit dedicated to advancing mind-body healthcare through research, education, and service. She was featured in the award-winning documentary entitled Stress, which is available for free on YouTube. So I will share Stressed with you so that you have the link to that, as well as a docuseries on NET. She is a lifelong surfer and regularly travels to Costa Rica to play in the waves. And so the beautiful part about inviting Dr. Carrick into these conversations with me and with you, as you can see, she has this whole picture of where I wanted to go with this season. To be able to talk to you about change, to be able to talk to you as my former client in the wardrobe space, which we talk about a few times for sure, to be able to talk this theological lens that she also shares with me, to be able to give you this holistic perspective around the body, and then, of course, surfing, this intimate knowledge of surfing, the waves, riding the waves. What are some of the terminology that you'll get to learn through her about riding the waves and surfing that are just the perfect way for you and I to understand how to move through change? So this is going to be a fun season, everybody. I am so grateful for Missy joining us and for you to get to know her and to hear some of her own story about change that she is in the midst of herself. And I am very hopeful that you and I will gain some insights about how to do this. Gosh, doing this real time with you is a little vulnerable because I don't necessarily have the answers around change. But I do recognize that style, which of course is like one of my great loves, and one of the reasons that I think you're listening is actually a tool and a technique that can help us move through these big changes. And I'm seeing it more and more as that tool for support, which I talk about actually way back in season 1. So I'm hoping that you and I are going to walk away with a million different nuggets, some learning, some resources, but mostly that you'll just enjoy this conversation between us as we are learning to explore and unpack and really learn to ride these waves of change together. So friends, until next time, I can't wait to introduce you to Missy and hear all your feedback, and I look forward to being with you. Hey there. I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you more about MFD Style, my wardrobe consulting business. I've been styling professionally for nearly 15 years, and it truly is my life's passion and purpose. In fact, my mission is to help you develop a confident and authentic signature style, breathe life into your existing wardrobe, and help you fill in with perfect, versatile pieces that are in line with your style and budget. And yes, all of this can be done both in person or virtually. This experience can transform your life. I have seen it happen countless times. And all you have to do is take that first step. Set up a free 30-minute consultation call with me, and we can start this journey together. You deserve to have a wardrobe that mirrors who you are, and I am so ready to help make that happen. You can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com. on Instagram at MFD_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.